about 3.5 weeks left of normal school. And then finals prep, and everybody understands the rule about finals. Is that correct? Yes. Raise your hand if you know about the finals rule. Okay, not too many of you, few of you. Okay. What I want to do is let everybody in here. I'm going to put on the screen the question that I want you to think about today. Since we are running out of time here to an extent. Let's see if I can't zoom this in a little bit. That's way too much. That's not going to work. There we go. All right. So for those of you entering the room here online and in person, I want you to think of one goal for the end of the semester. Okay. Virtual students, put in the chat box. In-class students, be prepared to share it aloud. And then on top of that, I would like you to revisit the idea of who started World War I. If you had to place blame on one country, who would you place the blame on? All right. So students in here, I want you again, take about 90 seconds to think about that. Students online in the chat box. This is just private between you and I. Go ahead and post what is one goal that you have for the end of the semester, something that you want to take care of. Okay. I am going to take attendance real quick while people are still entering. And then we'll get moving forward. Okay, those of you that have your cell phones out and earbuds in, finish up your song, your phone call, whatever you're doing, and be ready to participate, please. All right, so in class, I need 3 students to share their answer out loud. Okay, let's go ahead and put our phones away, respect our peers. Nate, give me one goal. Okay, so no failures for the semester. I could say that is a solid goal. Anybody else? I get 2 more. One goal you have for this semester, finishing off. What do you got? Now I'm going to cold call. All right, Jacob, what do you got? Passing biology. I've heard that is a challenging course. All right, one more person then. Yes, Christopher. All right, do well on your finals. If you have A's, remember you don't have to take your final. Let's see what else we have here. Pass classes, get A's and B's, give them grades up, do better. Keep my grades up. Biology again. All right, so these are some things you need to start thinking about as we get towards the end of the semester. Missing assignments. I think there's going to be here in the next few days a window where you're going to be able to turn in some missing assignments. So take advantage of that, especially in the classes that you have issues with. In my class, if you're going to turn anything in late, just a reminder, you send it directly to me as a Canvas message, okay? All right. The second thing I wanted to address was finals again, just so you know, if you can get your grade up to an A, and you got an A last 9 weeks, you are going to be able to not have to, well, you can take the final if you feel like it, but if you already have a grade that you like, it's called a no fault final. So basically your grade cannot go down at all. Everyone aware of that? Okay, excellent. All right, so then let's move on to some content here real quick. If you had to place the blame on one country, which is extremely difficult to do, who would you place the blame on for starting World War One? Chris, what do you think?
I kind of think it's Serbia because
He was trained by them, yes. So the question, those on Zoom, the answer was Serbia. To the question of which country would you blame for starting World War One? Does anybody have a different opinion? One that could be counter to him. And on Zoom, if you want to say anything as well, you're free to. Anybody have a different, who might you blame? Luke. All right, Austria-Hungary. Why would you blame them? Okay, they're the ones pressuring Serbia, and then they declared war on them. So it'd be easy to blame the person who claimed the war first, right? And that would be Serbia. I mean, Austria-Hungary who attacked Serbia. Now, the interesting thing here, as you see it towards the end of the period, is that nobody was willing to say out loud who actually got blamed for losing the war. And that was Germany. Okay. So we're going to try to trace those roots today, see how we get there. These are going to have lasting consequences on how the world looks, even to this day. I'll show you why. And here's what I want to, I don't know why they won't let me. There we go. Here's what I want to show you for today. So if you, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Canvas page. And should take me back to Canvas. It is. All right. I'm going to go ahead and reshare the screen. If those of you in class, you can look up here so that you get an opportunity to get your participation points today. I don't think I'm sharing that screen yet that I wanted to. 1 second here. All right, so go ahead and go to modules, folks. Go down to week 15, please. And it's here at week 15 that you're going to see end of World War I notes. Click on them, okay? If you did not take the quiz yesterday, it says week 14, quiz number 2, okay? I'm going to grade those at 10:30 and put them in the computer. If you don't have them in by 10:30, that quiz, it's going to go in as a 0, and you'll have to send me a Canvas message with what your score was on that quiz, okay? 2, you need to click on this. You need to download it. There's an arrow button right here on the screen. Click that arrow button, and you should be uploading a file. Okay, that file then should look like this right here. Okay, so I'm going to do a new share again, and for those of you in the room, you can see it on the screen. Those of you in class should be sharing on your screen. So participation points today. Take notes over the following big ideas and upload them to Canvas under the week 15 module for participation credit. So you're going to notice there are maybe 7 key ideas. So you take notes underneath here, the significance of these key ideas, upload it at the end of the period. This is going to be how we do participation instead Nearpod today. I'm trying to gradually get you to the point where you're going to be ready for next year, okay? So last 2 weeks, I made it extra credit. This week, I'm making it just, let's try mandatory today. I want to see what it looks like. All right, so if you could, everybody get this on their screen. Make sure it's ready to rock and roll. And then I am going to go ahead and get started from my Google Slides, and we'll go from there. Okay, I'm going to give everybody about 60 seconds, just get situated, because you're going to have 2 things on your screen, which might be a little bit confusing, but I think you can take care of it. All right, can I get a thumbs up from people who are ready to go? Right, okay, awesome. All right, Jordan, you good? All right, let's check somebody online. Michael, you're the only video that I have on camera. Thank you. Francesca, can I get a thumbs up? Are you guys ready? Are you ready to go? Excellent. All right, so we're gonna get going here, and we're going to address today the end of the Great War. So, one of the ways that the war ended was the United States entered the war. Okay. So, why is this such a big deal? Well, think about it this way. The United States had the largest economy in the world that had not been in this war for 3 years at this point. All right. They had been selling weapons and barbed wire and uniforms to the Germans, Austrians, British, and the French, both sides. Okay. So on May 7th, 1915, the Germans, their submarines, sunk a passenger ship called the Lusitania. All right. It was leaving. It's kind of ironic if you've been to Ireland. It was leaving about 10 miles away from where the Titanic sunk. Okay. That's almost the exact same port. And it was taking people from Ireland to New York. And the Germans sunk it. And there were some extremely prominent, if you don't know what prominent means, famous people on board from the United States that were connected to some of the most wealthy families in all the United States. And the Germans sunk it because they were under the impression that the United States was keeping was actually storing uniforms, bullets, heavy artillery, machine guns, food on the bottom of these ships. And then they were calling them passenger ships and sending them to Ireland and then sending them to Britain. Well, there is no actual proof that there was anything military related on this ship. Okay, and 700 plus people died. Like I said, about almost 100 Americans were on board. And so when this was sunk, this extremely angered the US press. And so the United States said to Germany, if you keep this going in 1915, we are going to go to war on the side of the British and the French. Well, this event then happened in February 1917. This is a big one. It's known as the Zimmermann Telegraph. Zimmermann was the ambassador from Germany to the United States. And so he wrote basically a telegram, which you guys know that's how they used to send mail. He wrote a telegram to the ambassador to Mexico, the United States. They were hanging out in Washington, D.C., but he wrote this letter, and in this letter, he said, we are going to resume what's called unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning they're going to start sinking any ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean, passenger ship or not. That's going to get the United States in the war. They admitted in this telegram. Okay. Then they say that they are going to, they're asking Mexico to attack the United States so that they can get back the land that they lost to the United States in the Mexican-American War, where the United States took Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, all the way up to California and into Colorado. Okay. So they say, if you attack the United States, we will then attack the United States as soon as we can. And then on top of that, to ice the cake, they say, if you want to invite Japan to go to war as well, go ahead and do that. We'll take Japan as well. Go ahead and please invite Japan to attack the United States, because the Japanese were upset that the United States would not allow them to occupy Korea. The United States said, no, you're not allowed to do that, but they did it anyways. But so the United States was kind of hampering the Japanese from growing. We'll talk about this a little bit later. All right. So what you end up with is this telegram gets copied. It's decoded. You know how coding machines work? So the British intercept it, decode it, and it gets published in American newspapers. If you're in the American public, would you have been upset? You would be livid. because this is your backyard and it is being basically these people are conniving to attack you. You're the largest military in the world at this time that's not at war. Okay. And so the US declares war on Germany on April 6th, 1917. That's basically just about 5 weeks after they intercepted this telegram. The United States had been very adamant about not getting into European affairs. Remember, if you remember the Monroe Doctrine, it says that we're going to deal with our stuff in our hemisphere. You deal with your stuff. We don't really want to get involved. Okay, well, this kind of is a big deal in world history, especially the last 120 years, because now the U.S. is getting directly involved in European affairs. Okay, the cartoon here, it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit not politically correct now, but this was in newspapers March of 1915. You can see John Bull used the American flag for protection. It says, "Can't you see I'm a bloomin' Yankee?" And so he's sitting on Lusitania, and then the German guy is up with his telescope saying, "Who east in what boat?" Okay, that's supposed to be the accent that they use, and they sunk it. Okay, so there's a political cartoon there. Here's another one right here. If you can look up here, this is the U.S. Patience as a ship. And then this is the latest submarine victim, maybe the last, and it's called the Crowning Achievement. And you can see a little periscope on the bottom left. And what's happening to the U.S. Patience? It's being sunk. So what does that mean for the U.S.? What's that? Yeah, they're about to lose their patience and go to war with Germany. So that telegram basically was the icing on the cake. Here's another one here. This is kind of April 1917. Remember, that was when the U.S. declared war. It says, very biased looking picture. You have the German with his Prussian helmet on, and Mexico with a sombrero on. It says, "Join with Germany and you get a bit of the United States." And so that was published in newspapers. Again, is this propaganda? Yeah. What does it make? What does it make people want to do? Fight against the Germans. All right. So while this is going on, towards the end of the war, you had the largest outbreak of an epidemic in world history. Okay. And many, many, many more people died during this than during what was the COVID-19 pandemic that we're still dealing with right now, will be for a while. 3 million people around the world have died from the COVID-19 pandemic. This outbreak was influenza, like a influenza B, so a more difficult strain of the flu. And because troops had been coming from the Middle East, all over the continent of Africa, all over Southeast Asia, India, China, the Philippines, and even shipping had been taking place in South America to provide food to the front lines. This caused it to get into it started in the trenches. They call it the Spanish flu because they think it originated in Spain, but it migrated to the trenches on the Western Front. And then from there, towards the end of the war, it just spread out. Okay. And this was, if you follow, this is just an example, but like the Indiana high school basketball tournament, they didn't have it for 2 years because of this. If you follow college basketball or college sports or anything, they did not have an NCAA tournament for 2 years because of it either. Okay. And so worldwide, think about the pandemic we're in now of 3 million and multiply that by 10. Yikes. Now, was most of it in the United States? No, because we were very little involved in World War I. We got there towards the tail end. The majority, you can see, hit the areas that were most densely populated, that had the worst healthcare. India and China. 12.5 million people die. And again, directly related to this war and their lack of ability to understand diseases and what's the word I'm looking for? Epidemiology, or it's a long word. Sorry. It's a Monday morning, but it's Tuesday. Anyways, well, maybe we'll take a look more into this tomorrow. I think it's kind of interesting. I got a video I can show you that kind of compares, but trying to get this done. So bad timing, right? But kind of a consequence of it being this war with all these different people. All right, so the end of the war occurred pretty abruptly. The United States declared war in April of 1917, but they don't get any troops actually to fight until the beginning of 1918. It takes the United States a good 9 to 10 months to get anybody to be able to fight, because our army, we didn't want to get into this war. Our army, we had no army. Our army generals were used to basically fight against Mexican rebels during the Mexican Revolution. A guy by the name of John Jack Pershing, who was chasing around a guy by the name of Pancho Villa on the Mexican border. He was named our commander, and then basically everybody else had been leftover generals from the War of 1899 and 1902 versus Spain for the U.S. to take the Philippines and Cuba. Okay, and so we had a bunch of old school commanders, and then a bunch of, early college age kids who'd been drafted go over there and fight. Now, at the same time that the U.S. joined, about a month later, Russia withdraws from the war. All right, because, and we're going to talk about this either tomorrow or Wednesday, because Russia has a revolution. Okay, some of you have heard of the Romanovs before, Anastasia, the lost princess. Maybe you've heard that story. I think in middle school, I'm imagining you learned about it. Did you guys learn about this in Washington Township Middle School? Is the Russian Revolution? No? Okay, what about in private school, Luke? Did you guys learn about that? Do you know who Rasputin is? No, you don't know. Then you don't know. Not yet. Then you'll learn. All right. So the Russians signed what's called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and they basically give away all of their European land that they had to the Germans. And now the Germans can take all of their troops that were on the Eastern Front and move them to the Western Front to try to defeat Great Britain and France. Now that's their plan, but what happens? Who had joined the war for Britain and France? The U.S. And the U.S. had a lot of shiny new guns and bad soldiers, but they had a lot of food and they had a lot of ammunition to provide, which boosted the Allied powers and Britain and France. Really, Canada now joined. And so this is what, again, this definition was on your quiz, the war of attrition. But basically, they fought to the end of November of 1918, and nobody won. They figured they had literally gone nowhere. And so Germany surrendered. This is kind of famous because we still celebrate this today. Germany surrendered at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the month, 1918. Okay, so 1918 at 11 a.m. in a train car in France. The German leaders, who they didn't even really know who they were anymore because the German Kaiser fled, okay, he just abdicated. He quit his throne, gave up his royal title, and left and lived on some island the rest of his life. Because of this, Germany didn't really have any leaders. So some people came in, they signed the papers, and they signed what's called an armistice. If you could write that word down, and I'm going to put this, I think it could have been in the, on the quiz from last week. I'd have to go back and look at it. But armistice equals what? Does anyone remember what that equals? Ian. Yeah, agreement to stop fighting. Okay, I'm gonna put that definition for those of you at home in the chat box. An agreement to stop fighting. Notice it doesn't say what, who won or who lost. If you look at these charts, all of these countries lost a lot of people, which we'll look at here in a second. But an armistice was signed. What do we call that day? Or what do we call this day? November 11th, now in history.
Veterans
Excuse me?
Day.
Anybody, you might know if you have a service member in your family. It is Veterans Day, exactly. So on November 11th, they still celebrate that around the world as Veterans Day because of the Great War, the war to end all wars that didn't end all wars, obviously. Okay, take a look at the casualties here. This is kind of staggering. Which country lost the most amount of people? Jordan, you can tell from the pie chart. Russia, 9 million people. I told you they fought horribly. But Germany lost 7 million. Austria lost 7 million. France over 6 million. The British over 3 million. They're a much smaller country, remember? Italy still was heavily involved. One thing that always gets me is the United States. Even though we only participated in about 9 to 10 months of battle, we still lost 364,000 men in that time. That's how deadly trench warfare was. Okay. And then you can see like the Ottoman Empire, or what is now Turkey, lost about 1 million as well. So this brings us then to what's called the Paris Peace Conference. Most people will call this the Treaty of Versailles. Some people call it the Paris Peace Conference, the same thing. And so when they got together to try to figure out what to do with all of the mess of World War I and who to blame, only 4 countries were invited to really negotiate. The British, the US, the French, and the Italians. And then they basically cut the Italians out after that. Who do they not invite? They did not invite Germany or Russia or Austria to participate in their own fate. The end, like basically, this is going to destroy the Habsburgs for the finally, and they've been around a long time. This is going to destroy Germany and Russia, and they don't even get invited to participate in the conference. Okay, this was a major deal. Again, the people who were with the French, the British, and the US got to sleep in the Palace of Versailles. Everybody else had to sleep like on like carriage stables and like small chateaus that were in this general area. Remember, what is this room? This picture should ring a bell. Gonna look eerily familiar. That's not the School of Athens. That's a good guess. What do you think, Ian? Ah, you got it. This is the exact same room and place where the German princes all came together with Prussia to declare themselves a unified country for the first time in 1871. This is 1919, so I'm not good at math, but that's 29 plus 19. What is that, like 48 years later? So 48 years later, the Germans are now standing in the back. Look at this. This picture is extremely famous for this reason. The Germans are standing in the back along with the Ottoman Turks, and the delegates of the British and the French are sitting down, and they're watching them basically sign treaty after treaty or clause after clause, which made Germany look like they lost the war. Okay. Also, notice that they don't even get seats at the meeting. They have to stand. Look at this guy. He's like, the famous thing is like he's resting on this like column. And the other thing is they had to stay in a barn, the delegates from Germany, because they didn't respect their government. And they had to they were marched through the servants' quarters, okay, to come to the signing of the papers. The servants' quarters are a door that's like 3.5, 4 foot tall and pretty narrow. It's where like food would be. You would walk food through there and, you know, accoutrement or whatever if you're having a party. And so they're marched through the kitchen and the servants' quarters to come to this. And it was extremely embarrassing. So remember, you go back to who lost or who started the war. Nobody said Germany, but who's paying for it? Germany. And why? Well, remember back, going back to that blank check I told you about, the blank check theory. And then also because their government just quit, ceased to exist. So here's some problems that we have. Okay, this is kind of important for you to jot down. So the United States President Woodrow Wilson came up with, very famously known, and you'll talk about it a lot more next year, so I'm not going to harp on it, but he came up with what's known as the 14 points. And this was 14 things that he wanted to do to create peace after World War I and not have another world war. One of those was the creation of what's called the League of Nations. I believe this is on your next quiz. And this was going to be a worldwide peacekeeping organization. Okay, after World War II, they actually made a strong one. It's called, does anybody know what it's called? What's that? That's different. That's Cold War. We might be able to get there in about 2 weeks. UN stands for the United Nations, okay? And so this time, though, they call it the League of Nations. But when they went to vote on it, if you know this, the United States, to enter into any treaty, the United States Congress has to vote on it. And Woodrow was a Democrat in a Republican-controlled Congress. And the Republicans thought this would certainly enter the U.S. into another world war. And so the U.S. does not join this peacekeeping body, that they would basically talk things out instead of going to war again. The U.S. does not join. The other reason why the League of Nations is weak is there were 15 countries that decided that they would join it. But when they went to vote, like if they wanted to put an economic sanction on a country for breaking rules, it had to be a unanimous decision. Okay, all 15 countries had to vote for the same thing. What's the problem there? What's that? Exactly. So when they vote to show up, they just happen to be absent when it's a vote against them. And so then the League of Nations couldn't do anything. So it's exactly what happened with Italy, Germany, and Russia. All right. The big three. Probably had those slides out of order. I apologize. I've messed around with this so many times. Okay. Is this on your note sheet, the big three? Okay, so basically the three ideas that the big three had, again, I already went over Woodrow Wilson. The only thing I didn't go over was this vocab word called self-determination, which basically he said after the war, everybody should be able to determine for themselves what kind of government they want to have. And colonies should get to choose whether they want to be a colony anymore or whether they want to actually, be their own country. Self-determination. You determine for yourself. Britain wanted to punish Germany because they were in so much debt to the U.S. and then to their own country, their own citizens, because every male that died was one less worker to work in the factories, was one less worker to, have a family and kids, and could have potentially, he had a family and kids, the government had to pay for them. And so Britain wanted to punish Germany, and then France, George Clemenceau, their goal was to make sure Germany could never, ever, 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 ever do what they did twice now, which is invade France and take them over, or at least start a war with France. So they wanted to punish Germany as harshly as possible. Which one of these three you think would have made the most sense? Peace without victory, punish Germany monetarily, or weaken Germany and make sure they have no army? You think punish Germany monetarily was the best one? Okay. Anybody else? Why would you want to have peace without victory? Then nobody gets to get all their big feelings of I'm the winner. Well, you like to win. Would you be okay telling them that you tied? Oh, interesting. If that means that there's actually gonna be no wars. So Woodrow had by far the best idea, but the United States, his own country, would not sign the Treaty of Versailles. We doctored a separate treaty up with every country later on. We never joined, and it ended up being an absolute fiasco. So here's what we have. Okay, so a war officially ended on June 28th of 1919, meaning that was the day they signed the treaty. Where's the irony behind that? Does anybody remember from their notes the irony behind this? The irony herein lays that that's the exact same day the Archduke was killed 5 years earlier. So for 5 years, that killing plagued the world, and especially in these areas where it was fought. Okay, they blamed Germany. So Article 231, which I mentioned last week, they had to admit that they started and lost the war, both of which they didn't think happened. Okay, that's called the War Guilt Clause. Article 231, you want to jot that down. That comes back again many times in this course the next few weeks. Germany was forced to pay equivalent to $500 billion today to France and Great Britain. The land that they took during the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, they had to give that back to France. Germany lost all of its colonies, and they went directly to Britain and France under their control. Germany lost over 25,000 square miles of land and 7 million tax-paying factory working peoples or farmers, either one, whatever you want to say. They lost 7 million people in population and 25,000 square miles of land. Then they put restrictions on the size of their army. The German army was never allowed to be over 100,000 men again. They were not allowed to have an air force, meaning no planes. They had to turn over their entire fleet of ships in the North Pacific Sea, and you can see a picture of them sinking. They sunk their entire navy. Okay, they were only allowed to have very few ships, and they were only allowed to have one military school to train like officers in the country. On top of that, then the provision was made that if Germany didn't pay, France could occupy their most industrious and wealthy region, known as the Ruhr region, where the steel and coal was made or produced, and they could occupy that as well. So if you're Germany, are you upset? You're wildly upset, but there's nothing you can do. Okay, here is a political cartoon for you. It says this League of Nations bridge was designed by the president of the US, and he's got the keystone here. And what's happening? Can't hear that. What's happening is the US or Uncle Sam is preventing the bridge from being strong by not putting in the keystone. That's the middle of the stone of the bridge that would make it strong. And then the irony is it says this bridge, League of Nations bridge, was designed by the president of the United States, but we won't finish the bridge. So that meant that the League of Nations was weak. All right, here's the land that Germany lost. They split Prussia into two different places. So you had what was called the state of East Prussia. In the middle, they put Poland there. They took land. This is Alsace and Lorraine, the bottom left. I mean, again, all that, a lot of the land they took in those wars under Otto von Bismarck was just taken back and given to the people. All of these new countries were formed. I want you to see these. So for the first time in world history, in 1919, these countries were formed. So that means they're only 101 years old. And some of them less than that. Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, and Yugoslavia. And I want you to look on the map. What are all these countries doing that they created at the Treaty of Versailles? What are they doing there? What do you think the point of that was? Ian? You're right on the track there. Notice all these are Eastern European countries that are created because communism had spread to Russia, and nobody at the meeting wanted communism to spread into Western Europe or the United States. And so they created all these countries, told them they could have their own governments. And at the same time, they did this to create a buffer zone. That's what we call it, between Russia and Germany. Okay, so that Russia couldn't influence this weak Germany and turn them into a communist state. All right, let's you could basically just write a buffer zone was created so that communism didn't spread into Western Europe. That'd probably be the most easy thing to write down. But I wanted you to see how all of these countries were split up. And this is how Turkey becomes a country as well. All right, so this helps us finish up right here. So let me walk you through this. You have a lot of unhappy people at the end of World War I. Germany was punished way too harshly. If you punish somebody that hard, what are they going to do? Get back at them, aka World War II. Duh. Italy was told that they would get land in Austria-Hungary. They have to give it back. Japan had given China 21 demands, and the US said, no, 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 no. You can't take over all of China. And so they had to give back a bunch of the areas of China that they had taken over. And the irony behind that is they'll do the exact same thing in World War II. Russia lost about a third of its land, especially its valuable land, at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And then instead of giving Russia back that land, even though they fought on the side of Britain and France because of the Russian Revolution, which we'll talk about, they aren't invited to the meeting. That land is taken from them and turned into all those new states. So naturally, what is Russia going to want to do? That's common sense. They're going to want to go in and take those states, right? They do that twice. They do it in World War II, and then they do it again during the Cold War. It's ridiculous. The US then comes out of this. They should have looked like the saviors. Instead, they just look like cowards. Why? They doctor up, their president comes up with all these great ideas, and then their Congress says, no, 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 we don't want to be involved in that. And they don't sign the treaty. All right, is everybody with me here? You see why this was a mess? This, again, is directly going to lead to another world war, which is super unfortunate and not necessary. And it ultimately makes the Great War, the war to end all wars, what? Useless. And a devastating amount of lives lost, families affected, the whole world then hits a plague or an epidemic after it. And at the end of the day, it's really going to put the the US economy in charge, and the US does a great job. It's called the Roaring Twenties. Women get the right to vote. Strong women's movements get alcohol made illegal. Same time, bootlegging becomes extremely popular. Jazz music, start to see a heavy influence of African American culture in the US, but it's not going to last that long because you have this thing called the Great Depression. All right. So there's a little highlight for you. I don't know the order we're going to go in. I'm going to give you one read assignment this week on the Russian Revolution, but this is the time where a lot of times at the end of the semester, where I just kind of teach. I'm trying to get through as much as I can and teach you the ins and outs and teach it from world history perspective and not the US perspective that you're going to get next year. Okay. All right. I got to end there. I'm going to reshare the screen real quick as the bell's going to ring here in 2 minutes. So when I reshare this screen, it says turn in your notes here at the end of class for participation points. So you click on that. And I already have 5 submissions. So upload your notes here, please. When you're done, you are done and free to leave. And Diamond said, so everybody lost at the end. That's exactly right. No country came out looking good. Good point, Diamond. Thank you. All right. If everybody could, once you do that, go ahead and log off and have a great rest of your day. Everybody on Zoom. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
So you're not confused and didn't just I did it. I'm not able to click like at all. But I'm able to do
It's
everything
'cause it's
else.
right there. Put it there.
Oh.
Yeah, no worries.